Dr. Samuel Henderson had always believed that healing happened in the quiet moments between heartbeats. He moved through the hospital corridor that Tuesday morning with the same careful attention he had given to his patients for 37 years. The late autumn light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Room 314 had become as familiar to him as his own living room over the past 8 months. Inside lay Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, a woman whose life had taken an unexpected turn on a rainy evening the previous spring. Her silver hair spread across the pillow like moonlight on water, and her hands rested peacefully at her sides. The newspapers had called her a millionaire philanthropist, but Samuel saw only a woman who needed care. Each morning he would check her vitals and speak to her as if she might respond at any moment. Today something felt different. The bandage on her left temple had shifted during the night and needed changing. Samuel gathered his supplies with the same reverence he had learned from his mentor Dr. William Hartley all those years ago. "Good morning, Margaret," he said softly as he entered her room. "The leaves are turning beautiful colors outside your window today." He had grown up in a small town where his grandmother Rose had taught him that kindness was never wasted. Even when people couldn't respond, she would say they could still feel the warmth in your voice. Samuel began removing the old bandage with gentle fingers. His wife Helen often teased him about his tender touch, saying he handled everything like it was made of spun glass. The morning sun streamed across Margaret's face as he cleaned the healing wound. It was then that he noticed something remarkable. Her eyelids fluttered, not the random movements he had seen before, but something purposeful. Samuel paused, his hands still holding the fresh bandage. "Margaret," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly like someone waking from a long dream. She blinked several times, adjusting to the light. When her gaze finally focused on Samuel's face, she smiled. "You have kind eyes," she said in a voice rusty from months of silence. Samuel felt his own eyes fill with tears. In all his years of medicine he had never experienced a moment quite like this. "Welcome back," he managed to say. Margaret tried to sit up, but Samuel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Take your time," he said. "You've been sleeping for quite a while." Over the next hour, as nurses bustled around checking equipment and calling doctors, Margaret kept her eyes on Samuel. "You changed my bandages, didn't you?" she asked every day. Samuel nodded. "I could feel your gentle hands," she continued, "and I heard your voice telling me about the weather and the seasons changing." She paused, looking out the window at the golden maple trees. "You talked to me about your garden and your wife Helen's apple pie." Samuel was amazed. He had indeed shared these simple daily moments, believing somewhere in his heart that she could hear him. "Why?" Margaret asked. "Why were you so kind to someone you didn't even know?" Samuel thought about his grandmother Rose and all the lessons she had shared while they worked together in her vegetable garden. "My grandmother used to say that kindness is like planting seeds," he replied. "Sometimes you never see them grow, but they're always growing somewhere." Margaret's eyes grew bright with understanding. As the days passed and Margaret grew stronger, she learned more about the man who had cared for her. Samuel lived in a modest house with Helen, his wife of 42 years. They had raised 3 children who now lived in distant cities with families of their own. Samuel tended a small garden behind their house where he grew tomatoes and roses. He drove a 15-year-old car and brought his lunch to work in a metal box that Helen packed each morning. Margaret discovered that Samuel had used his own money to buy her fresh flowers when the hospital arrangements withered. He had requested the day shift specifically to be her primary caregiver. When Margaret's lawyers and financial advisors arrived to discuss her estate, she made a decision that surprised everyone. She asked to speak with Samuel privately. "I want to do something for you," she said, "something meaningful." Samuel shook his head gently. "You don't owe me anything, Margaret," he replied. "Taking care of people is what I chose to do with my life." But Margaret had made up her mind. She had spent her lifetime building wealth, and now she wanted to build something more lasting. "What if we could help other people together?" she suggested. "What if we could make kindness grow like your grandmother's seeds?" 6 months later, the Henderson Whitmore Foundation opened its doors. The foundation provided grants to small-town hospitals for equipment and training. It funded scholarships for nursing students who promised to work in underserved communities. Most importantly, it created a program called Gentle Hands that trained healthcare workers in the art of compassionate care. Samuel continued working as a doctor, but now he also traveled to hospitals across the country. He taught other healthcare professionals that healing happened not just through medicine but through human connection. Margaret recovered completely and threw herself into the foundation's work with the same passion she had once brought to business. She and Helen became close friends, bonding over their shared love for Samuel and their belief in the power of small acts of kindness. On quiet evenings, Samuel would sit in his garden with Helen and Margaret. They would watch the sunset behind the maple trees and talk about the letters they received from people whose lives had been touched by the foundation. Children who had received better medical care because of new equipment, young nurses who could afford their education because of scholarships, patients who felt less alone because their caregivers had learned to listen with their hearts. Your grandmother was right about those seeds, Margaret would say, watching Samuel tend his roses. They really do grow in places we never expect. Samuel would nod and continue his careful work, knowing that the most important seeds are planted not in soil but in the human heart. Years later, when medical students asked Samuel about the secret to good doctoring, he would tell them about Margaret. He would explain that healing begins with seeing each person as worthy of gentle care regardless of their circumstances. Kindness, he would say, is the most powerful medicine we have. And in room 314, which had been converted into a meditation space for families, there was a small plaque that read, "In memory of the quiet moments between heartbeats where healing truly begins." Margaret and Samuel remained friends for the rest of their lives. Their foundation continued to grow, touching thousands of lives across the country. But both would say that their greatest accomplishment was simply learning that kindness shared between strangers can bloom into something beautiful and lasting. In the end, it wasn't the money or the recognition that mattered most. It was the understanding that every person we meet carries both wounds that need healing and gifts that need sharing. And sometimes the simplest act of changing a bandage with gentle hands can change two lives forever.